The infrastructure bank is something that was pledged, as many of you will know, in the 2015 election in Canada. You are more new to the party since 2015.
I am more new, yes.
So you've just put out your new deal, your first deal in August, financing the rail project in Montreal. Tell us about it. Why was that a project that was good for the bank, and what can we glean from that about what projects going forward you might be interested in?
So our mandate is to invest $35 billion in capital over the next decade. And in three priority sectors: urban transit, trade and transport, and green infrastructure. So obviously, urban transit is what REM is all about. It is a project that has private capital, which is another one of the markers on our mandate, which is investments in one of the three sectors that are built in the public interest and that can attract private capital. So clearly, with a $3 billion equity commitment from the Caisse de dépôt, it met that criteria. And then for us, therefore, the trick was to find what the right role would be for the bank within that capital structure. And in each of the investments that we're going to review, we're going to want to find out, or we're going to want to figure out exactly what's the best way for us to work with the equity sponsors, the other financial sponsors. And in this particular case, a 15-year loan actually turned out to be the best solution that we and the equity holders thought would help bring this thing to life.
So that's a $1.3 billion deal, 1% rate rising to 3%.
Correct, over a 15-year period.
Heck of a deal. I like it. Can I get one of those? Is this the kind of format that you're going to be looking at?
If you're going to build a $6.5 billion infrastructure project that is in the public interest and that will be in one of our three sectors, then we can talk.
Well, I'm just a journalist, so we'll see. But I think what kind of similar transit projects might be, on the radar? For instance, things like Toronto's talked forever about a relief line, those kind of projects. Would that be something the bank would be interested in?
So we will think very broadly about the potential projects, so long as they meet, they're within our focus areas. So urban transit broadly, we're interested in discussing. Has to be new infrastructure or a large improvement in capacity, large increase in capacity. And of course, it has to have a revenue generating component. So we want to ensure that we have proper alignment of the private capital to the revenue generation component and taking the revenue risk. So those are all important components which make a project sort of CIB bankable, as opposed to something that might be procured more traditionally with traditional government procurement or traditional P3 model, where availability payments drive the economics to the investors.
I think people will want to know about the governance. If someone is coming to you with a project, does it have to be a project that the Trudeau government likes? Does it have to fit sort of their milieu? How independent is the bank?
So the bank is structured with an independent board of directors. So the investment decisions, of course, are worked on by management, recommended to our board of directors, which was independently selected, highly qualified board of directors that was selected through an extensive recruiting process, and that as representative of the country, it's very diverse in every way you can think about. So a very strong board of directors, and they are the ones that approve our investments. Now, we are a Crown Corporation. What we invest in has to be built in the public interest, as I said. So there's a public interest test that we put in place. And part of that is understanding the alignment with government's priorities. And I emphasize governments in the plural. So that is federal, provincial, municipal. And therefore, we, as part of our process, need to and want to engage with governments to understand their priorities and figure out which of their priorities could actually lead to projects that are bankable by the CIB. So yes, there's a public interest test, but we are set up purposely as an arm's length Crown Corporation so we can make the investment decisions rather than becoming part of a political football game.
Yeah, I suspect you're probably a little cautious about opening up what deals you're looking at, but one that will be top of mind, of course, you've been asked about it before, is pipelines. That would seem to fit pretty squarely in trade and transport as a category.
As a category, it does. So what would you like to talk about?
Prime Minister Trudeau bought himself a spanking old pipeline and potentially a spanking new pipeline. Is that expansion project something that could theoretically fit the bill for the bank? If the government sells it to a private sector partner, could the bank be a part of that transaction?
So our role is to fill a gap in a project's balance sheet that the private sector won't be able to fill on commercial terms. The Trans Mountain was already set up as a project with no government involvement, was sort of fully financed, had great revenue, offtake, all of that was all in place. So when you look at it with those lenses on, there really isn't a role for the CIB to play where you can say, here's a gap in the balance sheet and we're going to fill that, and that'll allow the project to come to life. Otherwise, there may be private sector interests on, but it would sit on a shelf. That's the we're trying to find those projects that we can bring to life that otherwise won't.
So the government's building this anyway, so there's not really a role for the CIB
so
to play.
In this particular case, we were not built to provide political risk insurance. We were built to. It's nowhere in our mandate, and nobody's sent an amendment to the mandate yet. So that's kind of it's a very different situation, very different dynamics. And I think the federal government made a decision to buy out Trans Mountain so that they could drive the process that will lead to construction. And they've already said, I think from the day they announced they would want to buy it, that they would also want to sell it. And I think the expectations are that there will be good demand for the assets once they've gone through the following several, who knows how long it's going to take, but this is following several months, and then construction period and so on. And then there will come a point where the government will want to sell it. My own expectation is that will happen as a private transaction and won't need the bank support, but who knows? We'll see.
So the fact that projects that are already going ahead are less likely to be attracting interest from the bank.
Correct.
Okay. When they founded it, that you had like town reeves and councils saying, "Hey, this sounds great. It's going to, help me build my water treatment facility or what have you." I think that the government has struggled to really, dampen down expectations. How many projects are you looking at, and is there a minimum sort of threshold size? Like, I assume it's fair to say the bank is not going to be building every small town's water treatment facility across Canada.
The bank won't be building anything.
Okay.
The bank will participate as an investor, a co-investor, in projects where private capital can be attracted.
But we're not going to do one-off municipal type things.
I mean, the scale. So I don't want to put a threshold below which we won't engage in discussions, and the reason for that is that. Sometimes very small in the context of a $35 billion investment program. What appears to be a small project could still be transformative for that community. I think the challenge for us is that with limited resources to assess investments and to then manage investments, is that we don't have limitless resources to do that, and therefore smaller investments are tougher for us to engage with. Frankly, they're tougher for construction companies to engage in and so on. So it's, for us to convene the capital around projects, scale matters. Now, there are needs that come in smaller buckets, and hopefully we can find a way to maybe pool some of these things together so we can turn them into larger projects. If we can get, 20 similar projects in a row that we can attract capital to, that might be an interesting way for us to engage. But deploying $35 billion, $10 million at a time is a tough and highly consuming undertaking. And it's also important to remember some of these projects are are potentially not CIB bankable, right? Revenue generation. So on water, wastewater treatment, there's many municipalities who don't want to go down the path of revenue generation. That sort of takes them out of play for us.
So can you say what kind of projects or what specific projects you're kicking tires on?
The specific, I knew you were going to ask, and as you know, I'm going to say I can't talk about specifics.
Yeah, well,
we're fortunate. We've been, in the last 3 months I've been in the job, we've been approached by a number of both private sector and public sector proponents with what I'll describe as dozens of interesting projects. And so there is a lot of interest. We've also been approached by a number of potential investors who are asking the same questions. Can you share your list with us? And we're not at the stage yet where we're sharing lists with people, but we need to understand what interest there is and prioritize, engage with provinces, municipalities, federal government to understand where the various priorities may lie and then what role we can play. In the case of REM, it's a good example. It's one that had already been in discussions for some time. I think there was a clear gap in their financing that they needed to fill, and so we were able to act on that one more quickly. That being said, it was still a several-month process and discussion and negotiation with them.
And speaking to people about the bank, and I'm sure you get this all the time, and I will emphasize you're still fairly new on the job, so I don't want to, pin this too hard on you, but there's a sense of when is this bank going to do something? I mean, you must hear this, right? It's been in the works for a couple of years. The first project you've done was essentially replacing federal money that was already pledged. What do you say to people who are getting impatient, waiting to see the fruits of this?
I'd say a couple of months into my tenure, and of course not all me doing this, but the team had been working at this hard. But we have made $1.25 billion commitment. That's real money, and I think is allowing a flagship project to go forward. So yes, we have an organization to build. We still have a lot of capacity and capabilities to put in place so that we can do many more. I'm tempted to say faster. The realities in infrastructure investments, even when assets are well developed, mature, steady, etc., it still takes a long time to go through an investment process. When you add in the dimension that we're looking at greenfield and new infrastructure projects, it requires that much longer to do a good job. And since we're not in the business of just doling out grants, we're actually in the business of investing. That requires due diligence. And I think the Canadian taxpayers expect us to do that, to do a good job of that, and to act responsibly with $35 billion. And so rushing through to just put out capital, not really a good approach, I think.
It does seem, though, that there is a sense of frustration, almost maybe, I live in Ottawa, I can tell you the speed of government is not always rapid. So is that a tension? Is this just a reality, like, hey, Bay Street, whatever, we're a Crown Corp, we've got to jump through a lot of government hoops. Cut us some slack. It's going to take time.
I think that's frankly we're a Crown Corp. We got to jump through. That's not the issue.
Okay.
Right. The reality is we have a large mandate that we're going to look to deliver over a 10-year period. To start to look at month by month, what have we done this month? What have we announced, and so on. We're not in the announcement business. We're in the investment business, and I'd rather take a little longer to make sure that we find the right customized solution where we can help transformational projects come to life that otherwise wouldn't. That's going to take some time, and I think if we want to do it well, if we want to do it really well, it might take a little longer. But I think in the end, we end up with a much better outcome, and that's the goal: is to end up building more great infrastructure for Canadians that support the economy, that support sustainability, that support greenhouse gas reduction. So a lot of things that I think will be positive effects of what we're doing if we do it well. If we rush through it, if we if we try to pace ourselves on announcements rather than on investments, I think we just end up going down the wrong path.
So what's the mix of people who are approaching you, either investors looking for your project sheet or proponents? For instance, are there any international proponents saying we want to build this in Canada, but we're not from Canada?
Yes.
Yeah. So word is getting out?
Yes to all of,
okay,
yes to all
tell
of
us
the
about
above.
The mix.
Frankly, the first week I was in the job, I got a call from Asia, and they wanted to have, a copy of our brochure because they were curious to know what we did. I said, what you really want is not my brochure. What you want is something to invest in, right? And he said, yeah, that's true. So he said, okay, so we'll talk when we have something to engage with. So there is broad interest by private sector investors. So people are in the asset class who, even those who traditionally have invested only in more mature assets, are interested in going greener in many different ways, but more greenfield. So there's more appetite for that, and I think that's a mega trend worldwide, frankly, and one that we hope to tap into. There's interest, of course, by large Canadian institutional investors, large national and global construction companies are interested. There's a very well-developed, and Canada has a great reputation globally, I think, in the P3 sector. And a lot of those players naturally want to understand, are interested in doing more in Canada. It's a great place to be. I think people understand that, and so we really are getting lots of interest. And of course, there's interest from provincial governments, municipal governments, and federal government to identify the right projects that are CIB bankable, where we can attract a multiple of the capital that we're going to deploy to get more infrastructure built.
And what are you telling them finally about how you're willing to structure these deals? What are the ways that the CIB is coming into these potential deals?
We are investing in a customized way, project by project. So we have the flexibility to invest anywhere in the balance sheet, and we're willing to entertain whatever will help bring a project to life, as long as there's proper alignment, and of course the investment's got to meet our mandate.
So with the loan scenario of your first investment, that isn't the be-all and end-all model?
No, frankly, it wasn't the starting point in that discussion. It just, as a result of discussions, that's where we landed, because everybody agreed that actually was the proper role for us to play for a defined period of time. And after 15 years, our view is that the project will be able to refinance itself and won't need the bank to be around, and then we'll be happy to exit and let the thing progress and prosper.
What was the starting point? Was it an equity stake?
It's everything ranging from the traditional government procurement model to there's a range all the way to loan guarantees, and you kind of end up with a 15-year loan with attractive pricing, which is what the project could handle. So it's not negative interest rate, it's not zero interest rate. It is a loan, it's repayable. Which is a different formula than what some may have wished, I guess, but it's right for the project and it works.
Great. Pierre, thanks very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.